Have you ever seen someone hurt an innocent soul, thinking it was just a joke, only to realize too late what they had done? This man laughed as he kicked a little girl's loyal dog, not knowing the German Shepherd was more than just a pet. It was a trained protector, carrying a secret that would turn his entire life upside down. Before we go on, allow me to wish you peace and good health. Tell me from which country and at what time are you watching this story? The afternoon sun slanted across Main Street, turning the windows of Bozeman's old brick buildings into sheets of amber light. A faint wind carried the smell of coffee and baked pie from Evergreen Diner, mingling with the distant hum of motorcycles somewhere beyond the square. On the corner, a little girl named Sadie Monroe rolled her wheelchair toward the shade of a maple tree, her small hands pushing the rims with quiet determination. Beside her trotted a German Shepherd with a coat the color of tarnished gold. His name was Shadow. He stayed close, matching her slow rhythm, glancing at her every few steps as if counting her breaths. Each time their eyes met, his tail swept the sidewalk like a soft broom. People often smiled when they passed them. They saw an ordinary child with a loyal pet, but the ones who truly knew whispered a different story, that Shadow was no ordinary dog. 2 years earlier, Officer Jack Monroe had been killed during a robbery at a downtown store. His partner, Shadow, had refused to leave his side until the other officers carried them both out. When the department retired the dog, Jack's wife, Laura, took him home for Sadie, hoping his presence would fill at least a corner of the emptiness Jack had left behind. From that day on, Shadow became more than protection. He became heartbeat and memory, the living proof that loyalty could survive grief. At the diner window, Laura watched them with a faint smile, the steam from her coffee blurring her reflection. Sadie was speaking to Shadow again, probably telling him about the fair coming next week, or the pumpkin pies she'd seen in the bakery. The girl's laughter rose, soft but clear, and Laura closed her eyes for a moment, thankful that sound still existed in her house. Across the street sat Ray Callahan, a retired K-9 officer whose hearing aid caught the whistle of every passing truck. He recognized Shadow immediately, the disciplined stance, the silent awareness. He sipped his black coffee, nodding to himself. Jack's dog, he murmured, half smiling, still on duty. Traffic drifted lazily by old Fords, a pickup carrying hay bales, a family sedan headed toward the foothills. Bozeman was that kind of town, a place where everyone waved at each other, where church bells still marked noon and children's bikes leaned against porch rails till supper. Life moved slow enough to hear the wind through the cottonwoods. "Hey, sweetheart," Laura called, stepping out with 2 lemonades. "Don't go too far, okay?" "I won't," Sadie answered. Shadow sat tall beside her, tail thumping once in agreement. Laura bent to stroke the dog's neck. "Keep her safe, partner." Shadow tilted his head, eyes bright, as if he understood every word. Ray watched the exchange and smiled behind his cup. There was something comforting about it, a kind of order the world rarely held anymore. But that peace, like glass in sunlight, could shatter without warning. Down the boulevard, a low rumble began to rise, engines, heavy and uneven, echoing against the brick walls of the quiet town. The sound grew louder, 5 motorcycles rolling in like a slow-moving storm. People turned their heads as the riders passed, black leather catching the late sunlight, laughter echoing off the storefronts. They weren't from Bozeman, everyone could tell. Outsiders had a different rhythm, a different way of taking space. Sadie looked up. "They're loud," she said, half curious, half worried. Shadow's ears pricked. The low growl that rumbled in his chest was almost inaudible, but Laura heard it. She placed a hand on his back. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "They're just passing through." One of the bikers, tall, broad-shouldered, gray in the beard, slowed as he reached the cafe corner. He caught sight of the girl in the wheelchair and the dog sitting guard beside her. For a moment, his grin faltered, like he'd seen a mirror of something he didn't expect. Then he smirked, revving his engine, the noise breaking the still air. Ray Callahan set down his coffee. He'd seen that expression before, the mix of boredom and mischief that too often led to trouble. He straightened his posture, eyes narrowing. Sadie flinched at the sound, her small hands gripping the rims of her chair. Shadow moved closer, his body between her and the street. The other bikers parked along the curb, their laughter bouncing off the windows of the diner. It wasn't yet cruelty, just arrogance, the kind that often needed an audience. Laura felt a flicker of unease. She gathered her purse, meaning to cross the street, but something in Ray's steady gaze stopped her. The old officer shook his head slightly, as if to say, "Wait, watch." Inside the diner, the waitress lowered the volume of the radio. A slow country song drifted through the air, strangely out of place beside the roar of engines. Sadie spoke softly, trying to sound brave. "It's okay, Shadow. They're just noisy." Shadow's tail didn't move. His focus was locked, muscles drawn like a bowstring. The bikers removed their helmets, their laughter spilling into the open air. The gray-bearded one, Duke, the others called him, flicked his gloves onto his handlebar and glanced over his shoulder at the little girl. "Nice dog," he called out, voice thick with sarcasm. "Keeps the wolves away, huh?" His friends chuckled. Ray's fingers tightened around his mug, knuckles pale. Sadie blinked, uncertain whether to answer. "He's a good dog," she finally said, her voice barely above the hum of engines. The men laughed harder. "Hear that, boys?" Duke said. "The pup's a hero." Ray's chair scraped softly as he stood. He adjusted his jacket, revealing a faded police emblem stitched on the sleeve not to threaten, just to remind the street what decency looked like. Laura crossed halfway now, her voice calm but firm. "All right, fellas, enough fun. It's a nice day, don't ruin it." Duke turned, that smirk widening. "Just talking, ma'am. No harm done." But his eyes never left the shepherd. There was a challenge there, small but dangerous, the kind men used when they wanted to prove something to no one in particular. Shadow's growl deepened, low and steady. The sound seemed to roll through the ground, a quiet warning that reached even Ray's bones. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of gasoline and dust. A paper cup rolled down the sidewalk, bumping against Sadie's wheel. She bent to pick it up, and in that split second, Shadow stepped forward, placing himself between her and the man in leather boots. Ray took a slow breath. "Don't," he muttered under his breath. But the moment hung there, fragile and waiting, as sunlight flashed on chrome and the hum of engines filled the space where laughter had been. Laura stopped on the curb, her heart beating hard. Across from her, the reflection of her daughter and the dog shimmered in the diner's window, two small figures of calm in a world that could turn cruel in a heartbeat. And just as she opened her mouth to call out, Duke shifted his stance, a grin, a shadow of motion, a spark of arrogance about to test something sacred. The story of that moment, and what followed, would echo through Bozeman for years to come. The noise lingered long after the engine stopped. Main Street had gone still, except for the faint ticking of cooling metal and the uneasy shuffle of feet on pavement. Duke leaned against his bike, arms crossed, a smirk spreading under his gray beard. He liked the way people avoided his eyes, how power hung in the air when others grew quiet. Sadie felt Shadow's weight beside her, solid and certain. The dog's tail had lowered, no longer friendly. His eyes were steady, unblinking, fixed on Duke. Laura's voice came out careful but firm. "Sir, that's enough. Please leave my daughter alone." Duke chuckled. "Relax, ma'am. We're just admiring your little soldier here." He nodded at Shadow. "Bet he'd bite the mailman if you asked him to." Laughter rippled from the others, a low, ugly sound that didn't belong to this small Montana town. Ray Callahan stepped off the diner's porch, his boots crunching over the gravel. "You gentlemen finished with your comedy act?" he said quietly. His voice carried the steady weight of someone who'd seen real danger and didn't need to shout about it. Duke turned. "And who are you supposed to be, Grandpa?" Ray smiled faintly. "Somebody who knows a working dog when he sees one." For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Even the waitress inside stopped wiping a counter. Sadie's hands trembled slightly on her wheelchair rims. She looked up at Duke and whispered, "Please don't scare him." Duke bent forward, finding sympathy. "Scare him? Sweetheart, I don't scare dogs." He winked at his buddies, enjoying their laughter. Shadow's low growl deepened. It wasn't loud, just steady, like a warning that the earth itself was tired of disrespect. Ray's eyes sharpened. Trained response, he thought. That dog's not guessing he's reading threat levels. The men didn't notice. One of them, tall and bald, tossed his cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his boot. "Come on, Duke. Let's see if the hero salutes." Laura moved closer to her daughter. "Sadie," she said softly, "come here, honey." But the girl couldn't move. Fear pinned her to the chair, not the wheels. The gray-bearded biker took one step forward, and another. The sound of his boots echoed off the diner wall, slow, deliberate. "Easy, partner," Ray said evenly. "Don't do anything you'll regret." Duke grinned. "Regrets for people who get caught." Shadow's ears twitched, reading every shift in tone. His body tilted slightly, muscles coiling not to attack, but to intercept. "See?" Duke said to his friends, half laughing. "Look at him ready to play hero." Inside, someone whispered, "Should we call the sheriff?" The answer came back. "He'll be gone before they arrive." Laura reached out a trembling hand toward Shadow. "Stay, boy." Her voice quivered. "Stay." But even as she said it, she could feel his breath steadying, his discipline taking over. The crowd that had begun to form on the sidewalks stayed silent. The town had always been friendly, but friendship faltered under the shadow of violence. Ray took a slow breath, remembering his own partner years ago, a shepherd just like this one. He still remembered the weight of fur against his hand, the trust that had saved his life more than once. "That dog," he said softly, "would die before he let that child be hurt." Duke snorted. "Then maybe he ought to prove it." Laura's heart stopped. Before anyone could move, Duke shifted his stance again, a mock half-step forward, boot-tapping the pavement. Shadow's growls snapped into a sharp, thunderous bark that echoed down the street like a gunshot. Windows rattled. A woman gasped. Duke froze, then laughed, high and nervous. "Guess he's got opinions." Ray's voice cut through the noise, calm but edged. "That bark had structure. That's not a warning, that's command training." Duke frowned, the grin faltering just slightly. Somewhere in the back of the crowd, someone whispered, "That's Jack Monroe's dog." And just like that, the air changed. Duke didn't notice, but the others did the shift from amusement to respect, from noise to the kind of silence that comes before a lesson nobody expects to learn. The gray in Duke's beard caught the sunlight as he tilted his head, squinting toward the girl and her dog. "Jack Monroe's dog?" he repeated, a trace of mockery in his voice. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ray took one careful step forward. "It means that animal has more discipline and courage than you'll ever understand." The crowd behind him shifted. Some nodded. Others simply watched, unwilling to breathe. Sadie reached down, resting her trembling hand on Shadow's neck. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're okay." Her voice cracked on the last word. Duke smiled, but the arrogance had dulled. He crouched slightly, his shadow falling across the dog. "Easy there, hero. I just want to see if you're as tough as they say." "Don't," Ray warned again, but pride rarely listens to wisdom. Duke reached his boot forward, close enough that the edge of it brushed a loose pebble near Shadow's paw. The dog's breathing slowed one deep inhale, one silent calculation. His chest rose and fell, his eyes fixed on Duke's movements. Then the man did it, a small, thoughtless kick. Not hard, but sharp enough to send a jolt through the air. The sound that followed was quiet at first, a deep, guttural growl, old as war and as pure as loyalty. Shadow didn't leap, he didn't snap. He only stepped back, braced himself, and then barked again, a sharp, commanding sound that seemed to hit Duke square in the chest. People gasped. Someone's coffee cup shattered on the diner floor. "Enough!" Laura shouted, running forward. "Stop it!" The wind picked up, carrying her voice down the street. Duke straightened, his face tight with sudden embarrassment. "He touched me first," he muttered, but no one laughed. Not even his own crew. Ray's eyes were cold steel now. "That dog's been trained to take bullets and still save lives. You want to see what real restraint looks like?" Duke's jaw tightened. "You talking big for a man hiding behind a mutt?" You call that a mutt," Ray said quietly. "But he served longer and harder than you've ever stood for anything." The silence between them was electric thick, humming, alive. Shadow stayed still, muscles taut, tail low but steady. Sadie's fingers dug into her chair arms. She wanted to scream, to run, to make the whole world stop. Instead, she whispered again, "Please, just go away." The words hung in the air like a fragile prayer. Duke turned toward her, his pride pricked by the tremor in her voice. He gave a low chuckle. "You hear that, boys? Little lady thinks she can order us around." Something in him snapped, maybe fear, maybe shame, He took another step forward and, without thinking, swung his boot again, this time harder. It connected. A dull thud. Leather meeting flesh. Shadow's body jerked, stumbled back, hit the pavement with a sound that made the entire street flinch. Sadie screamed, "No!" The town seemed to freeze in a single heartbeat. Every face turned pale. Ray dropped his cup and moved, fast for a man his age. "That's enough," he barked, crossing the street. Shadow lay still for half a breath, then rose. Slowly, deliberately, as if time itself obeyed his command. His chest heaved once, twice, and his eyes locked on Duke again. The growl that came next wasn't rage. It was focus, the kind of cold precision that belonged to training, not instinct. Duke's smirk faltered. His friends shuffled back a step. "Hey," one of them began, but Ray's voice cut through. "Don't move." Rex stood tall now, tail low, posture perfect. His gaze burned with quiet authority. "You messed with the wrong soul," Ray said, calm but firm. "That's not a house pet. That's a retired officer." Duke opened his mouth to answer, but no sound came. Around them, phones rose. Someone whispered, "I'm recording this." "Oh." The entire town held its breath as the image burned itself into memory. The child, the dog, the old officer, and the man who'd just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Shadow didn't lunge. He didn't bark again. He simply stood, every inch of him saying what words could not. "This ends here." And in that stillness, for the first time, Duke looked uncertain. He had come to Bozeman for fun, for noise, for laughter. But what stared back at him now wasn't a frightened animal. It was duty, loyalty, and judgment, wearing a shepherd's coat. The laughter died. Somewhere, a church bell struck 3. Ray took one slow step closer, his voice low. "Walk away, son, because if you don't, this town's going to remember what happens when arrogance meets loyalty." For a second, Duke almost listened. But pride, the same pride that had brought him there, still burned in his chest. He spat to the side, muttering something under his breath, and turned as if to leave. But as he did, the smallest movement, a twitch, a gesture drew every eye back to him. His boot shifted toward the dog again. And that was the moment when everything changed. The kick came fast, sharper than before, not play, not accident. A flash of movement, a sound that cracked through the quiet like thunder splitting wood. Shadow's body folded, hit the pavement, and the air tore open, with the kind of silence that always comes after something unforgivable. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Even the engines stopped their idle growl, as if the machines themselves knew a line had been crossed. Sadie's cry shattered that silence. "Shadow!" Laura ran, her shoes clattering against the curb, her heart already breaking. "Oh God, Shadow, no!" She dropped to her knees beside him, hands trembling, voice shaking. The shepherd stirred a soft whimper, his paw twitching as he tried to rise. His body trembled from shock more than pain. Ray reached them first. He crouched low, one hand lifted toward Duke. "Stay back," he warned, the calm gone from his tone. "You just committed assault, and not just on a dog." Duke's smirk was gone, replaced by the stunned realization of a man who hadn't expected consequences. "It was just a—" Ray's stare cut through him. "Don't finish that sentence." Sadie leaned forward, stroking Shadow's fur. "You're okay, boy. Please be okay." Her voice broke, small and shaking, as she pressed her forehead against his. Around them, the townspeople began to move slow at first, then faster. The waitress from the diner, 2 old men from the hardware store, even the teenagers who'd been sitting on the steps by the post office. They came like witnesses drawn by instinct, not courage. Someone called, "Get the sheriff." Another voice answered, "He's on his way." Duke stepped back, realizing too late that every eye on Main Street was now fixed on him, not in fear, but in quiet condemnation. His crew shifted uneasily, the thrill gone, replaced by shame that had nowhere to hide. Laura looked up, her face pale and fierce. "You hurt my husband's partner," she said. "You hurt my family." That hit harder than any threat. The words seemed to echo, bouncing off the windows of the diner, settling heavy in the hearts of those who heard. Ray laid a steady hand on Shadow's side. The dog's breathing was rough, but his eyes were open now, watching Sadie, not Duke. That loyalty, that calm defiance, broke something inside the old officer. He stood, slow but deliberate, and faced Duke. "This isn't your town," he said. "You came here looking for a joke. You found justice instead." M6. The gray-bearded biker opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came. His hands trembled from adrenaline, from guilt, from the unfamiliar weight of being the villain in a story that suddenly had witnesses. Blue and red lights flashed at the end of the street. The sheriff's car turned the corner, siren cutting briefly through the autumn air before fading to a hum. The sheriff, broad-shouldered and calm-faced, stepped out. "What's going on here?" Dozens of voices tried to answer at once, but Ray lifted a hand. "Sheriff, we've got an assault. Dog took the hit meant for the kid." The sheriff's jaw tightened. He knelt beside Shadow, checked the collar, and his eyes softened when he read the nameplate. "Monroe." He looked up at Laura, recognition dawning. "Jack Monroe's partner?" She nodded silently, tears streaking her cheeks. The sheriff rose, gaze hardening. "Who hit this animal?" Ray pointed. The crowd parted like water. Duke stood there, every bit of swagger drained from him. "I didn't mean." "Save it," the sheriff said, pulling cuffs from his belt. "Intent doesn't change the act." The sound of the metal clicking shut was quiet, final. The kind of sound that says a story just changed course. Sadie clung to Shadow as the paramedics approached with a stretcher built for animals. The sheriff stayed nearby, hand on Duke's shoulder, guiding him toward the cruiser. Ray watched the girl whisper into the dog's ear. "You're my hero," she said. "You're gonna be okay, I promise." When the sheriff's car pulled away, the town began to breathe again slowly, shakily. Ray looked toward the diner window, where his reflection mingled with the golden glare of afternoon Sunday. He felt something stir inside him, a memory of another day, another partner, another act of loyalty that had cost more than he could ever repay. The crowd started to scatter, but no one forgot. Bozeman had always been quiet, but that day, it learned the kind of silence that changes a town forever. The diner doors opened again as the sheriff's car disappeared down Main Street. No one spoke for a long moment. The hum of conversation that usually filled the place after lunch was gone, replaced by the slow creak of a ceiling fan and the faint crackle of the radio. Laura sat in the booth near the window, her hands still trembling. The lemonade she had made for Sadie sat untouched, condensation pooling on the counter. Her daughter was next door at the veterinary clinic now, waiting while Shadow was examined. Every minute stretched like a rope pulled too tight. Ray Callahan stood at the counter, turning his old police badge over in his palm. The edges had worn smooth, the brass dulled by years of service. But the emblem still caught the light, Bozeman PD K9 unit. He hadn't worn it in 5 years, yet somehow the weight of it felt the same. The waitress Maggie poured him another cup of coffee. "You think the dog will be okay?" Ray nodded once. "He's tougher than most men I've known." Maggie sighed, shaking her head. "Can't believe it. In this town, in front of that little girl. People don't always come here to hurt," Ray said quietly. "Sometimes they just bring their brokenness with them." Outside, the street was nearly empty now. The sheriff had left tire tracks of dust curling up in the wind. A group of teenagers still lingered across the way, replaying the event on their phones, their faces pale and silent. Laura pressed her fingers to her temple. "If Jack could see this," her voice broke, "he'd be furious. He'd want to protect her, just like Shadow did." Ray looked at her gently. "He did, through that dog." She glanced at him, confused. "Jack trained him," Ray said softly. "Trained him to know what danger looks like, what evil feels like, before it even moves. That animal didn't act out of rage. He acted out of memory." The words hung there, heavy and sacred. Across the street, a reporter from the Bozeman Daily Chronicle had arrived, scribbling notes, talking to witnesses. Cameras followed. One of the teens was already explaining what had happened. Laura could hear snippets. "The dog saved the girl. That biker just kicked him. It's all on video." "Oh," Ray frowned. "You know how this goes. By sundown, it'll be all over the state." Laura closed her eyes. "I don't want fame. I just want Shadow to live." The door opened suddenly, and Sadie came in, her cheeks red from crying. "Mom," she gasped, "the doctor said he's going to be okay. He just hurt his side. They're giving him medicine and rest. Laura pulled her close, holding her tight. Oh, thank God. Thank you. Ray's shoulders eased for the first time that day. Told you, he murmured. Tougher than any of us. Sadie looked up at him. Mr. Ray, is Shadow gonna be in trouble? He barked loud. Really loud. Ray smiled faintly. No, sweetheart. Sometimes the right kind of noise saves people. Maggie chuckled softly. That dog's a hero. You'll see. Folks around here won't let that go quiet. The afternoon sun was starting to fade, painting the brick walls in long amber lines. Across the street, someone had placed a small bowl of water by the vet's door, and a few kids had drawn a sign in chalk. Get well soon, Shadow. Laura's eyes filled again, but this time the tears came softer, easier. He's more than a dog, she said. He's the last piece of Jack I have. Ray nodded. And the best reminder that some things, courage, loyalty, they don't die. They just change form. Sadie sat by the window, watching the chalk drawing glimmer in the Sunday. Do you think people will forget? She asked quietly. Ray shook his head. Not this time. Outside, the last of the dust settled. The street looked calm again, but it wasn't the same calm as before. Something in Bozeman had shifted like a bell rung that couldn't be unrung. The townsfolk would talk about what happened that day, in barber shops, in grocery lines, in church pews. But it wasn't gossip anymore. It was gratitude. For a moment, as the diner lights flickered on and the smell of fresh pie drifted through the room, Laura looked at Ray and whispered, Maybe this is how Jack watches over us now through him. Ray smiled, eyes soft. Maybe that's how redemption works, one act of courage at a time. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the sound of laughter, quiet, unsure, but real. And somewhere down the block, in a small clinic room filled with antiseptic and hope, a shepherd opened his eyes, his ears twitching at the sound of his girl's voice echoing faintly from across the street. Morning sunlight spilled through the blinds of Bozeman Veterinary Clinic, slicing across the tiled floor in soft gold lines. The smell of antiseptic lingered, sharp but clean. Shadow lay on a padded bed near the window, a gentle rhythm rising and falling in his chest. A bandage wrapped around his side, but his eyes half open now carried the calm focus of someone who'd already decided to live. Sadie sat beside him, holding one of his paws in both hands. She had barely slept, her face still puffy from tears. But there was peace in her small smile. You're my brave boy, she whispered. Everyone's talking about you. Indeed, they were. Outside, Bozeman had changed overnight. At the diner, Maggie had taped a handwritten sign to the front window. Thank you, Shadow, a true hero. Someone else had placed a framed photo of him beside it, a printout from the video that had already made its way online. The caption beneath read, The day loyalty stood taller than pride. By 10 o'clock, a trickle of neighbors had turned into a steady stream. They left flowers, cards, and dog biscuits by the clinic door. A few veterans saluted quietly before walking away. Others just lingered, unsure what to say, but needing to be there. Ray Callahan watched from across the street, hands deep in his jacket pockets. He hadn't expected this kind of reaction, not from Bozeman, not from anywhere. People were usually too busy, too numb, but somehow, one act of loyalty had pierced through the noise. He crossed the road, his boots crunching over frost that hadn't melted yet. Inside, he found Laura and Sadie talking softly with Dr. Burns, the vet, a kind man with tired eyes and an old cowboy belt buckle. Morning, folks, Ray said gently. Laura turned, relief flickering across her face. He's doing better. They said he might even walk by next week. Ray smiled. Knew he would. That dog's got more grit than a Montana winter. Sadie giggled faintly, brushing Shadow's ear. He wagged his tail when I said pancakes. Smart fella, Ray said. Knows where breakfast comes from. Dr. Burns chuckled. He's healing clean. Bit bruised, but no breaks. Guess courage has got strong bones. Outside, another group gathered reporters this time. Ray frowned at the sight. Guess the news caught up. Laura sighed. I don't want the attention. I just want peace, he nodded. Sometimes peace shows up right after chaos. You just have to let folks see the good before the noise fades. From the doorway, A man approached the sheriff. He removed his hat, stepping quietly inside. "Mrs. Monroe," he said respectfully. "The county office called. They're thinking of holding a small ceremony at the harvest parade. Folks want to honor Shadow, maybe give him a medal." Laura blinked. "A medal? For a dog?" The sheriff smiled. "For service. For reminding us what it looks like." Sadie's eyes widened. "Can he wear it on his collar?" "Sure can," the sheriff said. "We'll make it fit right under his name tag." Ray grinned. "About time this town remembered its heroes." Shadow lifted his head, as if understanding his name. His tail moved once, slow but sure. Laura reached down, her hand trembling lightly as she brushed his fur. "Jack would have been proud," she whispered. Ray looked out the window toward Main Street, where the faint hum of engines had been replaced by quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. "Maybe he still is," he said softly. Outside, sunlight glimmered on the chalk letters drawn by children. "Loyalty never forgets." By late afternoon, Main Street was unrecognizable. Where the bikers had once stood, children now ran between hay bales and colored ribbons strung across lampposts. The diner windows glowed with signs that said, "Thank you, Shadow," in red and gold paint. Someone had placed a small American flag by the vet's door, the wind catching it gently. Laura walked slowly along the sidewalk, Sadie beside her in the chair, a plaid blanket tucked around her legs. Shadow walked on her left, his steps steady, though his gait still showed a hint of pain. His fur gleamed under the soft autumn Sunday. A new collar hung around his neck, one polished brass tag engraved simply, "Officer Shadow, Honorary Hero of Bozeman." People stopped to wave. Some clapped softly. Others just smiled through tears. It wasn't loud, not a parade yet, just gratitude stitched quietly into the rhythm of a small town rediscovering its heart. At the corner, Ray stood waiting with the sheriff. The older man looked almost out of place among the bright banners, but when he saw Shadow walking again, his eyes misted. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. "You made it, partner." Sadi grinned. "He never gives up." Ray tipped his hat. "Neither did your dad." The words hit Laura like a warm wind, unexpected, tender. She turned toward Ray, her voice soft. "You knew Jack well, didn't you?" Ray nodded. "Long time ago. We were on the same force. He trained Shadow's father, actually. Same discipline, same courage." He smiled faintly. "Guess it runs in the family, man and dog alike." Laura blinked, caught between surprise and memory. "I didn't know that." "I never told you," Ray said quietly. "When Jack passed, I didn't come to the funeral. I couldn't." He swallowed hard. "My last K9 didn't make it either, and I couldn't face another folded flag." She placed a hand on his arm. "You're here now. That's what matters." He nodded, his voice barely above the breeze. "Yeah, maybe this was how I was meant to show up. Not as a cop, just as a witness." Down the street, a small crowd had gathered by the park gazebo. The sheriff stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Folks, we don't need a speech today," he said. "We just need to remember what we saw. Courage, loyalty, and restraint. The kind that keeps a town like ours decent." The crowd murmured softly. He turned toward Sadie. "Young lady, would you like to do the honors?" Sadie's eyes widened. "Me?" Laura nodded. "Go on, honey." The sheriff handed her a small velvet box. Inside lay a simple silver medal engraved with the town seal and the words, "For service beyond words." Sadie leaned forward and clipped it gently to Shadow's collar. "This is for being brave," she whispered. A quiet cheer spread through the crowd, not loud or wild, just the kind of sound that comes from hearts swelling in unison. Ray clapped once, softly. "That's what standing tall looks like." A camera flashed. Someone began humming a tune, "God Bless America," maybe, or "Amazing Grace." It didn't matter which. The melody wrapped around them like a prayer. Laura glanced at the sky. "Funny," she murmured. "The clouds look just like the ones from the day Jack came home from the academy." Ray smiled gently. "Maybe he's watching the parade from better seats." Sadie giggled, looking up. "Then he can see Shadow's medal shining." The sheriff laughed. "Bet he's proud enough to brag in heaven." The laughter faded into a calm silence. Shadows lengthened. The sun dipped behind the mountains. The town felt lighter somehow, as if every clap, every smile, had loosened the grief that had clung to its edges for 2 long years. As they turned to go, Ray placed his hand over his badge one last time. Then he slipped it quietly into Sadie's lap. "What's this?" she asked. He smiled. "A reminder. Heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they walk on 4 legs and love someone enough to keep standing, no matter what." She held the badge close, her eyes bright. "I'll take care of it." "I know you will," Ray said. Behind them, the diner lights flickered on, catching the reflection of the metal around Shadow's neck, a small, shining echo of everything good left in the world. By the time Sunday morning rolled around, Bozeman wasn't just a quiet town anymore, it was a headline. Laura woke to the sound of her phone buzzing non-stop on the nightstand. News alerts, missed calls, hundreds of notifications from strangers she'd never met. She rubbed her eyes and squinted at the screen. Hero Dog Saves Child. The biker, the girl, and the canine that stood tall. Even national outlets had picked it up. Sadie came rolling down the hall, her blanket trailing behind her like a cape. "Mom, Shadow's on TV again." Laura hurried to the living room. On the small screen, a smiling anchor gestured toward a still image of Shadow lying beside the diner's curb, the moment right before everything changed. The caption read, "From small town loyalty to national hero." "Unbelievable," Laura whispered. Zadie grinned. "He's famous." Shadow, sprawled on the rug with his medal glinting in the morning light, lifted his head as if he knew they were talking about him. His tail thumped lazily. "Guess someone's not bothered by fame," Laura said, smiling. At the diner that day, the world seemed to have arrived all at once. A satellite van parked outside. Reporters milled about with microphones. Even tourists had begun stopping by to take pictures. Maggie, ever the optimist, poured extra coffee and said she'd never seen so many tips in her life. Ray sat at his usual booth near the window, nursing a cup of black coffee. He watched the bustle with quiet amusement. "Looks like we're trending," he muttered. The sheriff slid into the seat across from him. "You'd think we'd found oil." "Close," Ray said. "We found decency. Folks forgot what it looked like." Across the street, Sadie waved from her wheelchair. A pink sweater zipped up to her chin. Reporters surrounded her like bees, asking about Shadow. She answered politely at first, but soon grew tired of the cameras flashing in her face. Laura stepped in, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "That's enough for today, folks," she said. "My daughter's got homework, and Shadow needs his nap." A few laughed softly, but most backed away respectfully. The sheriff turned to Ray. "You think all this attention's good?" Ray shrugged. "Attention's fine if it reminds people why it happened. The dog didn't save her for likes or views. He did it because that's what love looks like when it's trained by duty." The sheriff nodded. "Still, makes me nervous. People come for pictures, not truth." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Laura sat by the porch with a blanket around her shoulders. The house was quiet again finally. Shadow rested beside her, his breathing slow and steady. She reached down, running her fingers through his fur. "You never asked for this, did you?" The dog tilted his head, eyes calm, as if to say, fame was just noise. The mission had always been simpler: protect, serve, love. Inside, Sadie's laughter rang out as she spoke with her grandmother on the phone. "Yes, Grandma, he really got a medal." "No, he didn't make a speech." Laura smiled at the sound. The laughter felt like sunlight returning to a house that had been dimmed too long. Ray stopped by later, carrying a small box under his arm. "Evening," he said softly. "Brought something for Sadie." He opened the box and revealed a framed photo, the one taken at the ceremony. Shadow sitting proud, Sadie smiling wide, the town gathered behind them. At the bottom was a line carved in brass. "Courage doesn't bark, it stands." Sadie gasped. "It's perfect." Laura looked at Ray, eyes glistening. "You didn't have to." "I did," he interrupted gently. "Because what that dog did wasn't just bravery. It reminded the rest of us what we're supposed to be made of." The three of them sat there as the sky deepened into violet. Crickets sang. The street lights flickered on one by one, soft halos of gold across the neighborhood. For the first time since Jack's passing, Laura felt the kind of stillness that didn't hurt, the kind that heals. Miles away from Bozeman's glow, a single bulb flickered inside the county holding cell. Duke sat on the edge of a narrow cot, elbows resting on his knees, staring at his scuffed boots. He'd been in fights before, had been thrown in drunk tanks, yelled at by cops, but never like this. Never with silence heavy enough to make him look inward. The TV in the corner played the same story for what felt like the 100th time. The news replayed the moment his boot connected with Shadow's chest, the pause, the gasps, the little girl's cry. Duke flinched each time the sound echoed through the empty corridor. He muttered under his breath, "Turn it off." But the young officer on duty didn't. Instead, he said quietly, "You should probably keep watching." Duke looked up, eyes raw. "Why?" "Because maybe you'll see what everyone else did." The officer turned back to his desk, leaving the man alone with the footage. Duke watched the clip again, this time without anger. He saw the way Shadow stood after the kick, unwavering, eyes steady. He saw Ray's calm, the little girl's tears, and the crowd's disbelief. And for the first time, he didn't see a dog or a mob. He saw courage and himself as the fool who tried to mock it. The weight settled deep in his chest. Somewhere guilt had long forgotten how to reach. He leaned back, exhaling hard, a sound more like a sigh than a curse. "What the hell was I thinking?" No one answered. Outside, the lights of Bozeman twinkled against the horizon like a faraway constellation, unreachable but still there. 3 days later, Duke was released. The sheriff met him at the desk with a firm handshake. "Court'll decide you're fine," he said. "But between you and me, the real sentence is living with what you did." Duke nodded. "I already am." Back in town, life had begun to settle again. The reporters were gone. The diner was just a diner again. But people still talked, not with gossip, but with gratitude. Kids drew pictures of Shadow at school. Someone mailed Laura a card with paw prints printed in gold ink. One afternoon, Ray found Duke standing by the town's small park, watching from a distance as Sadie tossed a tennis ball for Shadow. The shepherd caught it easily, bringing it back with gentle precision. "You planning to say something or just haunt the place?" Ray asked. Duke turned, his voice rough. "I came to apologize. Not for cameras. For real." Ray studied him, the slump of his shoulders, the dirt still under his nails. "Then start by meaning it." "I do," Duke said quietly. "I saw that video in the cell 100 times. Every time, I hated myself more. The look on that little girl's face." He swallowed hard. "I never meant to scare her." Ray's gaze softened a fraction. "Meaning's not in words, son. It's in what you do after." Duke nodded slowly. "I get that now." Laura noticed them talking and walked over, cautious but composed. Sadie followed, holding the ball. "That's him," she whispered. Duke knelt down, removing his cap. "Miss Sadie," he said quietly, "I'm sorry for what I did to you, to your dog, to your daddy's memory. I can't take it back, but I needed you to hear me say it." Sadie looked at him for a long moment, her small face unreadable. Then she smiled faintly. "Shadow already forgave you," she said. "He only bites bad people. You're not bad anymore." Duke's throat tightened. His eyes glistened as he nodded, humbled beyond words. "Thank you," he whispered. Shadow stepped forward, sniffed Duke's hand, and to everyone's surprise, gave it a slow, gentle nudge. Laura exhaled softly, emotion flickering across her face. "Seems like we're all learning how to forgive." Ray smiled faintly. "Bozeman's good at second chances." As the sun dipped low, Duke lingered a moment longer, watching Sadie and Shadow play. Then he turned toward the diner. "Mind if I help around here for a bit?" he asked Ray. "Something tells me I owe this town more than an apology." Ray nodded once. "Start with coffee cups. End with dignity." And so he did. That night, the same sky stretched above them, all the same stars, the same quiet. But for the first time in a long while, it felt like everyone beneath it was breathing easier. Sometimes, redemption doesn't arrive with fanfare. Sometimes, it just walks back into town, humbler than before, hoping someone will let it start again. The first snow of the season arrived early that year. drifting softly through the morning air like feathers shaken loose from the clouds. The flakes gathered on the window ledge of Laura's kitchen as she poured coffee, the smell of cinnamon rolls mingling with the slow hum of the radio. Outside, Bozeman looked peaceful again, smoke curling from chimneys, a few Christmas lights already blinking along Main Street. Sadie was at the table coloring a drawing of Shadow wearing his medal, the words, "My Hero," written in bright purple at the top. The German Shepherd lay beside her chair, head resting on his paws, his eyes following each stroke of her crayon with quiet affection. "Mom," Sadie said, not looking up. "Do you think people can change?" Laura smiled faintly. "I think they can try. And sometimes trying is enough." Before Sadie could reply, a soft knock came at the door. Laura frowned. It was early for visitors. She wiped her hands on a towel and opened the door slowly. Duke stood on the porch, hat in his hands, his breath visible in the cold. He looked different now, not just cleaner, but quieter. The lines on his face seemed less carved by anger, more by thought. "Morning, ma'am," he said carefully. "Didn't mean to intrude." "Oh." Laura hesitated, surprised, then nodded. "Come in. It's cold out there." He stepped inside, the warmth of the kitchen wrapping around him. Shadow lifted his head, ears perked. But there was no growl, only recognition. Duke smiled nervously. "Hey, boy." Sadie looked up from her drawing. "It's you," she said simply, no fear in her voice. "Yeah," Duke said softly. "It's me. I wanted to thank you all for forgiving me when I didn't deserve it." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden box, worn smooth from handling. "I made this," he said. "Used to carve bikes out of wood for fun. Figured it was time I made something that mattered." He opened the lid. Inside was a hand-carved figure of a German Shepherd standing tall beside a little girl in a wheelchair. The detail was astonishing, the curve of her hair, the shimmer of the dog's metal, even the hint of a smile on both faces. Zadie gasped. "It's us!" "Ah." Duke nodded, eyes glistening. "You and your partner, the way I saw you that day. Brave." Laura covered her mouth, moved beyond words. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Duke smiled faintly. "Didn't expect forgiveness. Guess I was hoping for a second chance to be the kind of man my old man wanted me to be." Ray appeared in the doorway then, holding a paper bag from the diner. "You beat me here," he said with a half smile. "Coffee and peace offering, I assume?" "Something like that," Duke replied, a trace of humor easing his voice. Ray set the bag down on the counter. "You doing okay?" Duke nodded. "Better. Been helping Maggie fix up the diner roof. Started volunteering at the shelter, too. Figured I owed more than words." Laura looked at him for a long moment, then stepped closer. "Sometimes words are where it starts." He lowered his head slightly. "Then let me say this right. I'm sorry not just for the kick, but for being the kind of man who thought power meant hurting something weaker. That's not who I want to be anymore." Laura's eyes softened. "We believe you," Sadie beamed. "You can come to the parade next week. Shadow's leading the dog march." Duke chuckled quietly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." He bent down, letting Shadow sniff his hand again. This time, the shepherd leaned forward and gave a slow, approving lick. Duke froze, overwhelmed. Ray smiled. "That's how he swears you in. You're one of the good guys now." The laughter that followed filled the kitchen with warmth. The kind of warmth that seeps into the walls and stays there. Outside, the snow kept falling, gentle and unhurried. And for the first time in years, Duke felt something he hadn't known he'd been missing. Peace. The following Saturday, Bozeman woke to sunlight glittering over the snow, as if the whole town had been dusted with forgiveness. It was Parade Day, the last big event before winter settled in for good. Main Street gleamed with wreaths, paper snowflakes, and banners strung from lampposts reading "Loyalty, Love, Second Chances." Laura buttoned Sadie's coat, wrapping a red scarf around her neck. "You ready, sweetheart?" Sadie nodded eagerly. "Shadow's leading the parade. He even gets his own float." Outside, the air smelled of pine and cocoa. People gathered early, some bringing folding chairs, others warming their hands with thermoses of coffee. Maggie's diner had set up a hot chocolate stand under a striped awning, the sweet steam curling into the cold air. Ray stood near the starting line, his breath forming little clouds as he spoke to the sheriff. "Looks like the whole county showed up," he said. "Not for me. the sheriff replied with a grin. "They came for that four-legged hero of yours, M." At the far end of the street, a float rolled forward, simple but beautiful. A small wooden fence lined the edges, and in the center stood a sign carved by Duke himself. "For those who serve without asking why." Shadow sat proudly beside Sadie, his medal glinting beneath the morning sunday. The crowd erupted in cheers. Someone waved a flag, and children shouted his name. From the edge of the crowd, Duke watched quietly. He wasn't wearing his old leather jacket anymore, just a heavy flannel shirt and a knitted cap pulled low. His hands were buried deep in his pockets, but his eyes never left the float. Ray noticed him and walked over. "You could have joined the lineup, you know." Duke shook his head. "This ain't my moment. It's theirs." Ray nodded slowly. "Maybe, but redemption's not about staying invisible, son. It's about showing up the right way this time." Duke hesitated, then took a step forward, just enough for Sadie to spot him through the streamers. She waved excitedly. "Duke, over here!" The crowd turned slightly, murmuring as they recognized him, not with anger this time, but with cautious curiosity. Laura's eyes met his across the street. For a moment neither spoke. Then she smiled, small but genuine. It was all the invitation he needed. When the float stopped in front of the old courthouse for the ceremony, the sheriff raised a microphone. "Bozeman's always been a town that remembers its heroes," he said, his voice echoing across the square. "But sometimes we forget that heroism isn't just in uniforms or badges. It's in forgiveness. It's in learning to stand back up." He turned toward Duke. "A man once told me he wanted to make something that mattered. I think he just did." Applause rippled through the crowd. Duke's face flushed, his eyes lowering as he shuffled forward. He climbed the steps, standing beside Sadie and Shadow. He cleared his throat. "I don't have fancy words," he said, voice rough but honest. "All I can say is thank you for giving me a chance to make things right. That dog, he taught me something no man ever could." He paused, looking at Shadow. "That strength isn't how hard you hit. It's how gentle you can be after you've been hurt." "Oh?" A hush fell over the crowd, deep, reverent, warm. Then someone started clapping. Another joined, and soon the whole street was applauding, the sound rolling like a wave through the cold morning air. Laura stepped forward, pressing something small into Duke's hand. Officer Jack Monroe's old badge, polished and gleaming. "Jack always believed people could change," she said. "Keep this as a reminder of who you're becoming." Duke's throat tightened. He stared at the badge for a long moment, then pinned it carefully to his shirt pocket. "I'll earn it," he said quietly. Ray placed a hand on his shoulder. "You already started." As the parade moved again, Duke walked beside the float. No longer a man burdened by shame, but one guided by purpose. Shadow trotted proudly, his tail swaying like a banner of grace. The music swelled, a marching band playing "America the Beautiful." The crowd cheered, and laughter filled the air. When the float passed under the town's archway, sunlight struck the polished badge on Duke's chest and the medal around Shadow's neck, two glimmers of redemption shining side by side. Later that evening, as the last of the snow melted from the streets, Laura looked out her window at the quiet town. She saw Duke walking home past the diner, a small wooden carving tucked under his arm, another one, still unfinished. Sadie's voice floated from the couch. "Mom, can we carve something too?" Laura smiled. "Sure. What should we make?" "A heart," Sadie said softly. "Because that's what fixes everything." Outside, church bells began to ring slow, sweet, and full of peace. Winter passed gently over Bozeman, and by early spring, Main Street smelled of rain and fresh paint. The snow had long melted from the rooftops, leaving behind puddles that mirrored the blue sky and the town's slow return to normal. But something in the air felt different now, steadier, kinder, as if the place itself had learned to breathe easier. The diner had a new roof, Duke's handiwork. He'd started helping Maggie a few weeks after the parade, patching leaks, fixing shutters, and never asking for pay. When she tried to hand him money, he'd only shake his head. "Coffee's enough," he'd say, and it always was. Most mornings, Ray joined him at sunrise. The two men rarely talked about the past. Instead, they worked side by side, the rhythm of hammers and quiet laughter saying more than words could. "Funny thing," Ray said one morning, wiping his brow. "Used to think people didn't change. Spent 30 years watching them prove me right. Duke smirked, passing him another nail. Guess I'm the exception. Guess you are, Ray replied. But don't get cocky Redemption's maintenance, not a remodel. The sound of laughter from across the street caught their attention. Sadie was at the park with Shadow, tossing a frisbee from her wheelchair. The shepherd leapt through the air, caught it, and landed gracefully, tail wagging. Her giggle carried all the way down the block. Kid's stronger than half the adults I know, Duke said, his voice soft. Ray nodded. She got that from her dad. But that calm in her eyes, that's all her mom. By afternoon, the diner was full. Locals lingered over pie and coffee, chatting about the upcoming spring fair. Someone had hung a photo of Shadow wearing his medal on the back wall. Beneath it, a new sign read, Heroes, welcome here. Duke refilled mugs, moving with the quiet rhythm of a man at peace. Every now and then, someone would pat him on the shoulder or say, Good to see you around, Duke. He'd nod, humbled every time. When the lunch rush ended, he stepped outside for a smoke, though lately he didn't light it. He just liked the feel of the cold air and the view of the mountains stretching endless beyond the town. Laura joined him a moment later, wiping flour from her hands. You've become part of this place, she said. Duke shrugged, smiling faintly. Guess Bozeman's the first town that didn't throw me out. Maybe it's the first one you didn't run from, she said kindly. He chuckled. Fair enough. There was a pause, not awkward, just quiet, like the kind shared by people who understand each other without needing to say much. I've been meaning to ask, Laura said finally. The badge Jack gave you at the parade, do you still have it? Duke touched his chest pocket gently. Every day. Reminds me to stay straight. She smiled. He'd like that. Down the street, church bells chimed 3 times. Shadow barked once in response, tail wagging. The sound drew laughter from the crowd nearby. You ever think you were meant to end up here? Ray asked, stepping out with his coffee mug. Duke looked around at the diner, the park, the people waving as they passed. Maybe, he said softly, maybe this is where I was supposed to stop running. Ray nodded. Funny how God works. Gives you the test before the lesson. Yeah, Duke said. Guess I passed on retake. The 3 of them stood there for a moment, side by side, watching the sun break through the last of the winter clouds. Light spilled across Main Street, catching the diner windows, the badge on Duke's chest, and the golden fur of the dog playing in the park. It was quiet again, but not the heavy kind. It was the quiet of peace, the kind that says life, for all its pain and mess, can still turn out right. A week later, Laura found a letter in the mailbox, no return address, just her name written in careful block letters. She opened it at the kitchen table, while Sadie colored beside her. Mrs. Monroe, you don't know me, but I served with your husband years ago. I saw the story about your dog and the man who changed. Jack used to say, a good heart can't stay buried forever. I thought you'd want to know that what he taught us, loyalty, patience, forgiveness, still lives on, not just in Shadow, but in the people he's touched. It was signed, Officer M. Hale, Retired K-9 Unit. Laura's eyes misted. She handed the letter to Ray later that afternoon at the diner. He read it twice, then nodded. Jack planted more seeds than he ever knew. Across the room, Duke was fixing a squeaky hinge on the door. Shadow sat nearby, tail sweeping the floor, watching him work like a quiet partner. Laura folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her purse. He'd be proud of all of this, she said. Ray smiled. He already is. Outside, dusk settled over Bozeman. The streetlights flickered on, painting soft halos along the snow-dusted sidewalks. Duke finished his work, patted Shadow's head, and said quietly, Come on, boy. Let's lock up. As the 2 of them walked out into the cool evening, their shadows stretched long across Main Street, 1 man, 1 dog, both carrying the quiet proof that second chances are real. By the time spring touched Bozeman, the town had begun to breathe again. The snow was gone, replaced by green hills and wildflowers blooming along the fences. The diner windows were open now, letting in the sound of laughter and the smell of fresh coffee. Duke worked quietly behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, serving regulars who no longer looked at him with suspicion. Morning, Duke, they'd say, and he'd nod with an easy grin. To everyone now, he was part of the place. Laura and Sadie came by every Saturday. Shadow would curl up near the booth, tail thumping against the floor whenever Sadie dropped a crumb of pie. Ray sat at the corner table, same as always, drinking his coffee black and reading the paper. That morning, he looked up and said, "You see this? They're naming the new trail after Jack Monroe Pathway. Runs right by the river." Laura's hand paused around her mug. "He used to train Shadow's father there," she whispered. Duke smiled faintly. "Seems right that it carries his name." Ray folded his paper. "We should all go tomorrow. Pay our respects." Laura nodded. "Yeah, I think Jack would like that." The next afternoon was bright and calm. The four of them, Laura, Sadie, Ray, and Duke, walked along the new Monroe Pathway, Shadow leading the way, his metal catching sunlight like a tiny star. They stopped at a small stone marker by the riverbank. It read, "In honor of Officer Jack Monroe, who served with heart and left that heart behind." Laura laid a few wildflowers there. "He always believed people could change," she said softly. Duke nodded, eyes on the slow-moving water. "He was right. I just took the long way home." Ray placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "That's what matters, that you made it." Sadie laughed nearby as Shadow splashed in the river, droplets glittering in the sunday. "He's happy, Mom," she called. "He's smiling again." Laura smiled back. "So are we." That evening, the town gathered at the diner. No speeches, no cameras, just warmth. Maggie raised a glass. "To Jack, to Shadow, and to second chances." The room echoed softly. "To second chances." Duke stood near the window, watching the glow of Main Street and the people he'd once feared to face. Shadow nudged his leg and sighed a peaceful sound that said everything. Duke looked around the room at Laura's smile, Ray's quiet nod, Sadie's laughter, and finally whispered, "Home. I never thought I'd find it here." Ray heard him and smiled. "That's the thing about home," he said. "It finds you when you're ready." Outside, the wind carried the scent of pine and the chime of church bells across town. Duke stepped out under the stars, hands in his pockets, and looked up at the quiet sky. "Thank you," he murmured, not to anyone in particular, but to the life that had forgiven him. Behind him came Sadie's voice. "Hey, Duke, come inside. It's your turn to tell a story." He smiled, turned, and walked back toward the warm glow of the diner lights. There's a special kind of quiet that settles after forgiveness, not silence, but peace. Bozeman went back to its small-town rhythm, yet something in the air had changed forever. The diner lights still glowed each evening. Shadow still curled up by the window, and laughter still echoed from the corner booth. But beneath it all, there was a new warmth, the kind that comes when hearts learn to let go of what hurt and hold on to what heals. We watched a man like Duke travel from bitterness to belonging, a family rediscover hope through kindness, and a community prove that second chances aren't given, they're earned through grace. And maybe that's the quiet beauty of life. It doesn't erase our mistakes. It teaches us how to rebuild on the pieces left standing. The heart of this story isn't about guilt or tragedy. It's about what happens after, when someone chooses to make things right, even when no one expects them to. It's about the way a child's laughter, a dog's loyalty, or a neighbor's faith can guide us home, no matter how far we've wandered. Love, forgiveness, and the courage to start again, those are the cornerstones of every real home. Because unconditional kindness can change a destiny. Because everyone deserves love and a family to return to. Because human warmth matters far more than money or pride. And happiness, real happiness, begins the moment we start living for someone other than ourselves. Maybe you've felt it too, in the way an old song stirs a memory, or how a shared cup of coffee can close a distance years wide. Like the porch light left on for someone still finding their way, one quiet act of compassion can guide us through the darkest roads of life. So tonight, as you sit by your window, or maybe finish dinner with family, take a moment to think about who you've forgiven and who might still need your forgiveness. If this story touched your heart, leave a 1-inch in the comments. If it didn't quite reach you, or if you'd like to share a thought, press 0, because every opinion, like every story, matters here. And if this tale reminded you of something good, something true, stay with us. There are many more stories waiting to bring you peace, hope, and a gentle reminder that we're all still learning how to come home.